Good evening. Welcome to Black on Black Investing, a workshop series geared towards conversation, financial education, and expanding our notions of investment and wealth. The Black on Black Investing series is presented in partnership with the Black Mass Expo and the Boston Ujima Project Black Investor Committee. Tonight is the second installment of this workshop where we're focusing on futures, funds, and options. In our first session a couple of months ago, we discussed the ways that we already invest in ourselves and our communities, Black trust, and Afrofuturism through individual and community investment. Tonight, we're beginning with a roundtable guided by some local Black investors, Imari Jeffries, Rahn, Dorsey, Joyce Clark, and Ed Gatskin. After we hear from them, we'll be joined by Nwamaka Agbo, who's a restorative economics practitioner and recently became the CEO of the Katali Foundation. To lead our panel, I'm going to bring up Johnny Charles, I'm going to bring up Johnny Charles from the Boston Ujima Project. He's going to guide the conversation. And I look forward to listening along with you all.
Thank you, Sheena. Appreciate it. And thank you to our fellow panelists who are currently here tonight and are gracing us, myself, and everyone else who's viewing with their time, their talent, and their experience. And so we have a list of questions that we'd love to ask you all. And so let's dig right in. So to start, what are you investing in and why? And as you do this, please feel free to introduce yourself, first and last name, and continue with the question. And so I'll start off with Mr. Ed Gatskin.
Well, that's a pretty simple question for me because I always just invest in index funds and I never deviate.
And we can hop over to Miss Joyce Clark.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joyce Clark. And who asked me the question again, Johnny? I'm sorry. Ask me the question again.
What are you investing in and why? And I'm going to come back to Mr. Gatskin too and ask why index funds. But okay. For now, I want to stay on you.
Okay, thank you. So I invest in Ujima. And the reason I invest in Ujima is because I believe in their vision and their mission. And I think through that process, I will then be able to learn how to invest in other Black companies.
Appreciate that. Mr. Dorsey, Ron Dorsey.
Sure. Thank you, Johnny. Ron Dorsey, good to be with everybody. It really is, in some ways, kind of a longer story, but maybe I should first say kind of what's guiding investment for my wife and me. And part of it is about testing alternative capital mobilization strategies that we think might lean into transitioning to a more just and sustainable economy. And part of that is also about making sure that what we pursue has the potential to accelerate economic stability for communities of color. So increasingly, we have been trying to do direct investment in community-based organizations, both in Boston and Detroit. Detroit is my home, as many folks know, but also trying to figure out how we deploy that capital for social or community benefit. And so an example of this is that we're investors in a company called Resident Energy, which is trying to bring solar energy to communities of color. But we're also trying to figure out what are cooperative investment vehicles for us. And one example that I'll probably talk about a little bit later is we're part of an all-Black ownership group that is starting a farm in Loudon, New Hampshire, and really trying to figure out what the revenue model is for that, but also how we generate enough goods to give back to communities of color here in Boston.
Thank you so much. Imari Jeffries.
Hey everyone, is my mic okay? I decided to go to freestyle with headphone free. So I saw how Ron and Ed were doing it. So I wanted to be like those gentlemen. I continue to have conversations with friends of mine, particularly Black friends of mine, POC friends of mine from Cambridge. And one of the conversations that they say that they talk about is not being able to live in their own hometown going to high school, being born and raised in Cambridge. And so that really struck me, this idea of growing up in a place and not being able to live there, barely being able to live there as a rentor, and not being able to live there as a owner. And so one of the important pieces of investment in my portfolio is real estate and housing. And so and what I like about real estate and housing is that it reminds me of growing up, the candy now laters. Y'all remember now laters? So real estate is like a now later. You can eat some now and you can save some for later. And so real estate is, you could use it right now and you could save some for later. And so real estate it provides an ability for me personally to be able to manage my own living expenses, but to also be able to provide equitable housing for folks, particularly folks that look like me, for my real estate portfolio. And that's important that I try to prioritize us in my real estate investment. And so that is important that I do and try to do that and make it a point in all the ways that it's legal for me to do that. That's my disclaimer. I thought I saw Ed wink at me. But that's my disclaimer in the legal way that you can't discriminate. And then I think the second thing, and it really, and what I love about this group is that, it's an opportunity to learn from each other. And so, learning from Mr. Dorsey, and I know he'll go on in detail that, I'm also trying to pull together, Ron Dorsey Part 2, an investment group of Black folks to buy real estate in Vermont. And so, we have as a emerging group of folks started to look at real estate in around Brattleboro, Vermont, and really modeling some of the things that Ron and Mariama have started to do in Loudoun, but thinking about it might not be possible for us to own second homes or to look at real estate as a investment opportunity as an individual, but as a group, as a condo association, if you will, of Black investors, we can buy property. And I think with this piece of property, we're looking at, we're thinking more of a tiny house complex. And so, I think, the ability to be able to provide both second homes, if you will, with individual tiny homes, but also this getaway house phenomenon that's emerged with tiny houses. And so how do you, and I think, Dave Chappelle kind of created a model with Dave's summer camp in Ohio. So they engage with music and comedy and other things. And so are there Black meccas outside of Boston, like the farm that Ron mentioned, or like, the possibility of this getaway complex that we're trying to explore.
Thank you. Thank you all for that first question. I feel like I'm learning a lot. But there's one thing I want to come back to, though. Mr. Gatskin, index funds. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more about what index funds are? Because there's probably folks in the audience that it's unfair to make the assumption that they know. So it'd be great to kind of just dispel exactly what that is in your own terms.
So for people who, let's say, if you listen to the stock market or something like that, they'll say the Dow Jones was up today or the S&P was up. So both of those are actually indexes. So the S&P is an index, Dow Jones is an index, NASDAQ is an index, and there's hundreds of them. And there's indexes for every asset class. So there's bond indexes, equity indexes, real estate indexes, REITs, there's lots of those. So the theory behind it from a quantitative investing standpoint is that at any point in time, what's that?
You're fine.
Okay. At any point in time, you may do tons and tons of research on, let's say, trying to identify a particular company, a particular investment manager, and a particular industry. And at the end of the day, you may have done all that work for naught because, let's say, for instance, you invested in the airlines and you picked the very best airline company, and then Corona comes and all airline stocks go down. It doesn't matter how much work you did or how much research you did. So that is an asset class. So what we know is starting, let's say like from the 1900s to the present day, is that the stock market always goes up over time. So any individual company, individual pick may go up and down. And that's why there's a book called The Random Walk on Wall Street. And it would basically says stock prices move randomly. And so the best way to know for sure that your investment is going to pay off in the long run, again, just talking about stocks now, is to buy the entire index. So I would buy like the S&P 500 index, and I'd buy like the triple Q index, because that would be my way of investing in technology. So over the long run, statistically, even the largest, let's say, pension and investment people, and that's where I started out. I started in the pension and investment age area with people who had $100 million or more to invest. And so by being in that space, I was able to understand how are people like CalPERS and New York PERS, whatever, people who were investing $50 billion, $100 billion at a time. So being in that environment, I was able to learn what was working and what wasn't working. And I knew for a fact that I wasn't going to be, reading the stock charts, and I was never going to be a trader. And so if I was going to do anything else, I was going to be a buy and hold person. And I knew that if I was buying and holding, that would be the most successful way for me to make money for what I needed to do.
And I don't want to assume, but I imagine that some of that is why you invest, but specifically why the index funds.
Well, because I wouldn't be able to pick. I wouldn't think that I'd have the ability to pick winners and losers. And statistically, again, professional money managers for the largest institutions in the world, about 60% of the time, 70% of the time, they underperform the index. So you're paying professional managers a lot of money to do less than what you could have done if you just bought the index fund on your own.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to move on to the next question. What were the narratives around investing that you encountered growing up? And I'd love to start with Ms. Clark, if I can.
Hi. Interestingly enough, I don't recall hearing anything around investing. I didn't hear anything about it until probably I was in college, actually, and started looking into it myself and what it meant to be able to invest and what stock and shares were and things of that nature. So I've always been interested in that sense, but family, friends in the community growing up, never heard anything. Even though purchases like were being made, you just never talked about money and how that was afforded, right? It could have very well been through stocks. I recently found out my brother had an annuity. Who knew? I didn't even know what an annuity was. You know what I mean? But I mean, because our family didn't speak in those terms, I think we just kind of took the step and went above and started searching for things ourselves. Because, if other people that are out there doing it, and you open up the newspaper and you see, the stock exchange and all that, what does this mean, and why can't we be part of it? So I took upon myself as an individual, as well as I think my brothers did the same thing. And no shame to my parents. It just, I don't think was part of their forte at the time, but I'm in it now. So I enjoy it. I'm happy.
Nice. And I imagine that narrative is the same for a lot of folks who had to learn themselves or self-teach. So I want to hop back over. Mr. Dorsey, same question for you.
Sure. Interestingly enough, the only folks I knew who invested until I came to the East Coast were Black folks. So while it wasn't the primary focus of a lot of conversations when I was growing up, it was the subject often enough that it seemed like it was a foregone conclusion, even as a young person for me, that I was going to be investing at some point. So, I think about my grandparents who funded a good chunk of my college education out of interest-bearing securities that they bought when I was a kid. I think about my aunt and one of my mentors who were always insistent on giving me primers on investing. And in fact, my mentor, when I was a teenager, he used to make me sit in on some of his meetings with his financial planner. He was just like, listen, I just want you to take it in. And, eventually he was the first person to seed a mutual fund account for me, I think when I was about 15. And he was like, I want you on the stock sheet every day. I want you following your mutual. I want you contributing what you can. And so he helped me build a lot of discipline. The other thing I'll say, though, is that and it's a bit of a rarity, perhaps, but it was also sometimes the topic of conversation at the barbershop. And it was like brothers at the barbershop, auto workers, teachers, executives, talking about home ownership, buying rental property, talking about their portfolios, as casually as they were debating Magic versus Bird. And maybe I'm dating myself in this, but for the record, Magic is the GOAT. We can have that conversation later. Or as easily as they were discussing politics. So, it felt a little like oxygen to me, and I didn't know not to do it.
I appreciate that. Stand up Detroit. I appreciate that.
Stand up Detroit.
Johnny, don't give this guy a big head. If you spend time with Ron, you're gonna hear about Detroit. Don't boost Ron up.
I'm hearing it all the time. Imari, please.
Put some respect on our names, because we saved the country, brother.
Facts. That's true. That's true. Johnny, I think for me, particularly in real estate, there was this notion that real estate, particularly home ownership, was this magic thing, and you're supposed to walk into your forever home. And so the idea of owning 1-2 homes, not owning the home, getting rid of it, thinking about it as an investment vehicle and naming it as such. I think that was something that was unheard of growing up. It was you find the home, it's your forever home, and if you're lucky, you'll get it when your parents will pass it along, right? And so that was the extent of the narratives that I got and understood around investing. Growing up in Tennessee and really coming to Boston in my teens, it wasn't a conversation that that we had. And I think now what feels so different, and I think Ron is talking about it. There's so many apps, and one of the things I'm investing in and utilizing to invest in is Robinhood. There's so many simpler ways that I think for many of us, the idea of investing also, it belonged to a class or a group of people, right? And so that was also a narrative that I grew up with. So homes were not something to be invested in as part of a portfolio, and stocks and other investment engines were something of extremely wealthy people. And so apps like Robinhood or Acorn, have been, I think, valuable engines to start a lot of folks on. And so, nowadays, you can imagine giving your child a Robinhood account and put in $20 into it, right? And so having them do the type of trading and thinking through, what are Boston companies that they can invest their $25 and seeing it grow. And so you could start kids off with safe amounts for them to really make the decisions on their own.
I appreciate that. Same thing for you, Mr. Gatskin. What were the narratives that you heard about investing growing up?
So I didn't hear about investing. My parents were big on savings and thrift. So we did everything that you could possibly think of in terms of saving. My mother, made the clothes, and, they knit. We had a garden, so we all have our fruits and vegetables from the garden. And probably the biggest thing like that was my parents built their own home. So it took them 4 years. They took the money that my mother made, and they would buy lumber and bricks and stuff like that. And I remember at the time people were kind of teasing me. They're like, "Oh, your parents are never going to be finished at home, never going to be finished at home." But, they did 100% of it themselves. They finished it. And the part about that, though, is therefore they never had a mortgage, because they had the first home. Now they had a second home that was completely paid off. So, I don't think I appreciated the significance of what had happened until one day my mother was about 50 years old, and she told me she was retiring. And I said, "Well, how are you going to retire? You're only 50. And she said, "My kids are through college, they're through school. I don't have any debt." She said, "Why would I keep working? I've already basically now at this point had accumulated about $2 million." And she said, "I don't even spend the Social Security money I get." That's how frugally they were living, and they had accumulated so much money. So I couldn't really argue with them at that point, right? She had invested in her 401k at work. She was setting money aside. They were living very cost effectively, and therefore they were able to do an early retirement. And then Ironically, my mother got bored and she came out of retirement for a few years. And then that company had a buyout package, so she retired a second time and got even more money. So I began to realize the wisdom of their ways, I think probably when it was much too late.
Wow. And I would suggest that, maybe not suggest it, but this idea of saving is an alternative to investing, right? Because not an alternative, it's the same thing as investing, it's just another form of investing. Because that's what I've heard all my life, right? Because my parents weren't necessarily familiar with investment vehicles, didn't know how to go about it. But the one thing that they did know how to was save. So, back in the day, we just call them cheap, but now I know better. So the next question is, how did you get into investing? And more specifically, what was that first investment? And I want to start off with you, Imari.
My first investment was mutual funds, and I think like Ron, I was in the Army, and I was a dental technician in the Army, and the dentist who I worked with was a Black dentist from Alabama, and so I didn't know what he was talking about. I would spend time with him, and he would mutual funds this and mutual funds that. You got to. And so, and I think I was fortunate enough to be around, a mentor who introduced that concept of investing, and really, starting from where you are, right? And so I think that's where, I kind of got my start in investing. And I think another thing that's important is to think about how it sounds goofy because we're talking about investing, but I'm going to talk about friends, is think about how you constantly expand your friend group and your you as a mentee to someone else. I think I began the conversation, talking about this concept that I learned from, my dear friend, Ron Dorsey here about how to create a co-op on land and then imagine how that land could generate revenue and do something good at the same time. I just learned that a year ago. I mean, I was same age as I am now, and I just even, thought of it and had an opportunity to see the farm this summer, and my mind was blown, and I've been fixated ever since. And thinking about who else would be interested in, creating a part two to this model. And so I think always being around friends and having a friend group that's willing to just it was literally a casual conversation. And I think being in spaces where your friends are having casual conversations around what investing is and what investing means. And so real estate has always felt like a safe bet for me, because again, this now later philosophy of mine. And so that's felt right for me. And so I think, it's just, expanding that to different places. And this idea of doing it with friends and creating, Jay-Z said, no one wants to be the only millionaire amongst their friends, right? Like, is that really success if you're the only millionaire or you're the only successful person in your friend group? And so like, how do you raise up your community up with you, both your immediate community, your family, and your friends, as well as our extended community as Black folks? And so, how do we think about ways in which we can do things with the people who are closest with us to create prosperity for us all?
Thank you so much. And I'm going to come back to some of these pieces too. Ron, what was that first investment for you?
Yeah, I mentioned the mutual fund, but probably my first investment was I was a comic book collector as a kid. And there became a point at which I started doing it more strategically, probably when I was about 10 years old. And I remember my mom looking at me pretty crazy the first time I dropped $50 on a comic book. She was like, okay, maybe, all right. This is not going to happen every week. This is probably not going to happen every year. But long story short, it paid off for me. I still own that book, and it's worth about $12,000. So, that was my first experience investing. And so now I'm also interested. I continue to be interested in vehicles like collectibles and art and a number of other things. And to Imari's point about the technology that's in front of us, there's a platform called Otis, which allows you to buy fractionated shares of art and collectibles. And so when Otis opened about a year ago, I actually bought fractionated shares of a Kayende Wiley painting. I could never afford that brother's work, but I love that work. And so any little piece of it I can. And so, I mean, I think the amount I bought, it means that I own like a blue speck somewhere in the corner of that painting. But at the same time, I'm able to say that, you know, I own it, and I've actually seen appreciation already because a lot of those things actually appreciate at rates that are faster than the market. So being a comic book collector as a kid really, I think, opened my mind to the variety of ways that it's possible to invest.
I'm going to transition over to Joyce, but before I do that, what was that comic book?
It was Hulk number 181. It's the first time Wolverine ever appeared in a comic book.
You know a comic book collector when they say the title and the number, because there's always a serial number. So, all right, cool. I'm making that. We'll talk about that another time. Joyce.
Yes.
What was that first investment for you?
Mutual funds, actually, at work, 401k. And so having to choose what you wanted, you know, your 25% to go in for each thing. And so I don't know. I mean, I really liked it. I did some good picks. And so I've just kind of followed that. But interestingly enough, when I heard the gentleman mention Robinhood, I had just found fractional shares. So it's great to know that I'm on the right track with everybody saying these things. And I just think it's important that people know you don't need like $5,000-$6,000 to invest. You know, you can invest in just about anything and make a profit off of it, you know, because things grow. It can only go higher, right? It may go down, but it'll go higher again. So I really want to focus on fractional shares now to see what else is out there, especially Black businesses, you know, and be able to invest in them and help them grow as well. So you all make me feel like I'm on the upswing. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. I like that.
Mr. Gatskin. Thank you, Joyce.
Well, I actually tried to make my first investments at age 12, and my mother didn't believe me. And so by age 15, she finally said yes. And so that's when I took my the money I made for my paper route. For those people who can remember that far back, my paper route money, my lawn mowing money, whatever, and I started buying stocks. And the reason was that as I was telling you before about all this work that I was doing in the garden and the field and all that stuff, and I said, this is way too hard. I said, I want to be rich. I want to be able to pay people to do this kind of stuff. I want to pay people to work in my car. I want to be able to go to the grocery store. And so I thought the only way to get there was to be able to buy stocks and make investments. So that's what sort of motivated me and started me on that journey. And I just learned more about it over time.
I appreciate that. And I want to just step away really quickly from a couple of things. And I want to start with you, Rahn. And if this reflects your own experiences, I would love to hear it. I'm going to give everybody a chance to really kind of chime in. But how important is it to have someone who looks like you, who represents you and reflects your background, supporting you in what you invest? Because I think part of the investment part is the fact that individuals sometimes look for fiduciary agents or custodial accounts or companies. And oftentimes that representative sometimes don't look like them. So how important is it to have a representative kind of support you, walk you through? And I know, Rahn, you talked a little bit about growing up and having older gentlemen or friends in the barbershop, but what does it look like just to have that mentorship, that tutelage through that process in terms of having that reflection?
I mean, for me, it was critical. And again, the statement that I made about a lot of this being oxygen for me was really about seeing how normal it was among people in my community to both be investors, but also be hungry for information about opportunities as well, and to be in regular conversation with folks who are seeking out opportunities, but to even in informal ways. And I really do think about the barbershop in this regard, you know, overhear a conversation where you've got guys walking each other step through step about how they bought that rental property or what barriers they ran into. but they couldn't find a real estate lawyer, or I like this real estate lawyer better than that real estate lawyer. And so, it didn't just put the aspiration out there. I think I learned a lot about the practicality of how you go about doing some of these things as well. I think in the professional financial services industry, it's been my experience, though, that I've not interfaced with a ton of professionals of color. And I think increasingly, there are more who are doing planning and a number of other things. And in Boston, there are a number of luminaries of color in the private equity field and some other places. But just by way of a quick story, my current financial planner is somebody who was recommended to me by a very close friend of mine. And he is not a man of color. But when we met him, my God, did my wife read him the riot act. Like, if he wasn't carrying a BLM sign walking out of my house, he was not going to get the work. And he had to understand kind of the principles of the investing that we were doing. And he had to understand that it actually kind of had certainly a community, if not borderline nationalist bent to it. So, and that's kind of the accountability that we've had with him. But that is not where, we spend the preponderance of our money. The preponderance of our money has to go into the organizations and businesses that fuel our community and employ our folks.
Thank you for that. I'm going to hobble to Mr. Gatskin. What does it mean for you to have someone reflect your background and support in supporting you in investing? How was that for you?
Well, I would say that didn't have that positive experience. So most of the time I was on my own, right? So I was like, okay, I think this is the thing that I want to do. Like I gave the example before, my paper out money, that's what I was doing. And when I worked at what is now Mellon Bank in the institutional area, I think there was only one other Black person beside myself that senior in the company. And so, and when I was learning about all that quantitative investing, financial engineering, I was publishing articles, publishing articles on international investing and pensions and investment age and things like that. But who was I even talking to? Because there was nobody even for me to necessarily share that with. And so where I was able to share that with was in my church. So people knew that I had something to do with financial services. And because I wasn't selling insurance and I wasn't a stockbroker or anything like that, I was only giving them the benefit of the advice that I had known, completely objective. And again, there was nothing in it for me. So I was more of the person that was giving the advice as opposed to having had the opportunity to be around somebody to have received advice or mentorship or things like that.
Thank you. Same for you, Imari. You spoke about your relationship with Mr. Dorsey and having that support and guidance and getting alternatives to investing. What was that like for you? And if this also reflects your own background, what does it mean to have someone who reflects your background and supporting you in investing?
I think it's incredibly important to have folks who reflect our background that looks like us. When I think about take this for example, nonprofits that do affordable housing, right? And so affordable housing or housing that's affordable, particularly for renters, is fantastic. Because there's one level where you can live there and it's within your means, and so that's great. So you have more disposable income. You can afford to live in a place that's hopefully in the place that you want to live. And then there's another level to housing where housing is actually one of your first investment engines. And so if you're thinking about someone that looks like me, and do you want to get me into a house that I own that could build equity, or you want to get me into affordable housing, what would you do, right? And so part of it, if you understand our communities and you understand our relationship with spatial justice and land, that home ownership is important because it's not just about the place that you live, but it's also equity. It's the equity that you take out of your home to pay for your children's education, another investment. It's the equity that you take out of your home to lend to yourself to start your business, another investment, right? And home ownership means much more than a place that you can rest your head. It is also the thing that you can provide to your family, your children, your grandchildren, that continues to appreciate in ways that they can that it subsidizes their homes, their living, and it also gives them resources to further the investment. And for Black folks, life insurance and home ownership and small business ownerships are some of the only tools that we have had intergenerationally at our disposal. We didn't have access to the type of investment engines and tools that we've been talking about on this call. It's you own the little hardware store or the bakery that you gave to your kids, and your kids now own this bakery, so they have the ability to make a living. It's the home, it's grandma's house, it's big mama's house that you got, that auntie lived, that the cousin coming back from the army is now living in the room, or that someone else is living there that you own, right? And that, big mama takes the equity out to pay for someone to go to school. So that's another way. And then life insurance, right? Both whole or term life insurance, and that's a way for you to receive a sum of resources to, one, bury your loved one with dignity, but also have the resource to grieve properly, and also have some resources to move forward to continue the legacy of their life. And so, I think those I say basics, right? Those fundamentals are important, and to have someone understand the difference between just providing me with an affordable home or providing me with a house that I own that I can afford, I think are important. And I think when you have an experience that's similar to ours, you can have different conversations with people, right? You could talk to someone and say, hey, but I could afford, this apartment down here, or you could move here and buy this house. Right. And so, like, why would you talk them into buying the house when they can afford the apartment over here? And that apartment's cool. It's fun. It's modern, but they could own this house, right? And it could be, it's actually a house that they can live in as an investment. And I think those are some of the reasons why I think having people who understand our background, our context as people are important. And then, friends, right? I never, if you know me in real life, COVID, I don't normally wear sweatpants every day. And that this button-down shirt, I would regularly wear button-down shirts, to play basketball, right? This is my basketball button-down shirt. And so the idea of being on a farm, it is crazy to me until I saw, I heard Rahn, and, Rahn wears suits too. So I was like, what's Rahn talking about with this farm? And then I went to see it. And I was like, oh, I get it. And then we were talking about what it would mean to convert the barn into condos and a bunch of different things. And so like within the farm, there were so many other investment engines within the farm. And I was like, my eyes were open. And so I hadn't even thought about this, a year ago. And so I think being around people who can educate you through, through casual conversations around ideas to make your money work for you, and for you to do it in a way that's affordable, I think is important. It's important to have an extended circle in that way.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to take a little bit of a turn, Ms. Clark, if that's all right. So we've had a lot of things shared: equity, faith, principle. And within that spirit, do you have an investment philosophy that you actually use in your methodology in investing?
Wow, that's some kind of question you got there.
Wish I wrote it.
So let's start off with like-minded people. I try to stay true to myself and with people that surround me. I like them to look like me because and have some shared experiences, because I think conversation will flow easier and ideas come quicker. So for myself, it's really whatever I find interesting is what I'm going to pursue. That's the best way I know how to explain that, because I don't want to invest in something just to invest in it. I want to make sure what I'm investing is something that is true to itself, it's a company that's going to do better for the community, and at the same time do better for me, so that I can then invest in something else to make it do better for the community, or maybe even have it in the community and have them invest. So yeah, I think for me that's what it'd be: like-minded people who look like me, and through a shared experience can do better for our communities and ourselves. I mean, I feel like that's the theme everybody's talking about tonight.
Thank you. Well, thank you for lifting it. Same question for you, Mr. Gatskin. That philosophy, sir.
Well, it's really interesting because, like I would have said earlier, I'm more of a buy and hold person, and having gone to a place like MIT, then it's just about the numbers, right? You look at the numbers, and it's about what's quantitative, right? So conceptually, the idea is if you're in a casino, you want to be the house. You don't want to be the person that's betting. Meaning that if you own the casino, yes, there's people who are here and there who are winning every now and then, but in the long run, the casino always wins. So the point is, if you sort of take this quantitative approach to investing, then the kind of questions that you're asking about philosophy and stuff don't matter. You're indifferent to that, right? So if it's Smith and Weston and they're doing great, then you invest in Smith and Weston. If it's Raytheon, and believe it or not, those are the kind of companies that do tend to perform well. So whether it's tobacco, firearms, whatever, they perform well. And as you can probably tell, it doesn't look like any handgun manufacturers are going to go out of business anytime soon. So good time, good economy, bad economy, whatever. And so the problem is that if you have that kind of investment philosophy, you're almost like divorced from the needs of the people, shared values. You're not really putting your money where your values are. You're really just putting your money where you think you're going to make the most money. So in that particular situation, you want to be a private equity guy. You want to be a hedge fund guy. You don't really care, what happens. And in a sense, that's what you aspire to be, right? So if you're a hedge fund manager and it's your fund, you won't have enough vaults to put all your money. And so again, I'm just saying that as opposed to what we're talking about here. Can I invest in a friend who's really trying to start a business? They want to make a go of it. I know them really well. They're a hard worker, and I think they've got a shot. That may not maximize the return of my investment, but it might maximize it if I have a different view of what investing is. In other words, am I just trying to maximize the investment just for my own return or for my community's benefit? And so for me, I think that's why when you're talking about the investment philosophy, a lot of times from like a financial planner's standpoint, if they're like, let's say they have a certified financial planning license, they're just looking at asset classes and investments and returns. They're not really looking at it from like your personal philosophy, because they might say, that really has nothing to do with your investment. Like you can do that in your own time with your own money as opposed to your investment money.
I appreciate that. And I'm listening to my son in the background who's snapping. He's playing Fortnite. So I'm looking at my investment. I'm going, dude, can you quiet down a little bit? Jeez. It's all right, Papa. It's okay. All right. My investment's going crazy on the other side. But same question for you. And let me go to Imari. What is your philosophy in investing? Oh, you're on mute.
I appreciate you said the piece about your son being in a background and him being your investment, because I think the other piece too about our communities and other BIPOC communities, that we come from a tradition where our families actually think of us as their investment, right? And that there is a responsibility to take care of our parents and our elders. Right. And so there's no such thing as that your investment should be enough for you to take care of yourself, and you're not you're a burden to your kids. And so there's a lot of folks who might be listening to this conversation who come from a tradition that my entire work ethic is centered around providing my kid with the best opportunity to go to college debt free, because the harder I work at my job, the more I set them up for success, I know that my kids will take care of me in my old age. That is actually my retirement plan. And so we come from a community where that is actually a real thing. It's a reality. And so I want to note that, because it's both funny, but it's not, it's a joke and it's not a joke. And so, I think that's a real context for people that look like us, and a valid investment, right? And so I guess I want to raise that up and kind of note that our children are investments, and there are many folks who that is where they're investing 100% of their dollars in their family. I think I agree with a lot that Ed said. Folks think of their right pockets and their left pockets as different vehicles, right? And so for those of us in the nonprofit sector, we're always asking for right pocket investments from folks who want to donate to us, right? And so this is the pocket that I give away. This is my philanthropic pocket, right? But their left pocket, the pocket that they make money, is a different opportunity. And I think organizations like Ujima are actually asking for left pocket investments from folks who are philanthropists. These right pocket investments are limited. It's rooted in philanthropy. It's rooted in charity. The left pocket investment, which requires engagement from the folks investing the money, from the donors, is a different level of understanding. It's a partnership. It's a different level of skin in the game. They are already assuming that they're going to give away right pocket investments through philanthropy, through donations, through your grant. But the left pocket investments is how they make their money. And so, I think the more that we can get in conversations with folks who are larger philanthropists around investing with their left pocket instead of their right, I think the more that we'll have socially just investments, and that we can bring people along with us around investing in our issues that create lasting change.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask the same question of you, Rahn, but I'm going to take just a spin in terms of, yes, in terms of what is your philosophy, but can you tie that into why Ujima?
Yes. So at the top of the conversation, I talked about my wife and I really focusing on alternative capital mobilization strategies that we think will get us to a more just and sustainable economy. And so if I pull some of that apart, one, Ujima is important to us as an experiment in the alternative and in new economy solutions. Ujima is really rethinking, one, the focus of our investment dollars, but also thinking very holistically about what's the ecosystem that needs to be created for successful businesses, as well as, I think, a values-based approach to wealth building and collective wealth building. It's not just about individually adding zeros to Black folks' account. And I think if it's just about that, then the real risk we run is that we will simply maintain and replicate the systems that have oppressed us. And so there's got to be a deeper intentionality to what we're doing. We say capital mobilization strategies because we think it's inclusive of both investment and philanthropy. And I'm glad that that Imari raised all of the points that he did. And I think I want to be more specific about philanthropy in saying that it can't just be about the charity side. Like, if we're going to accelerate the kind of opportunity that communities of color need and deserve, then it can't just be about having folks have to buy money at very expensive rates. This also has to be about a capital transfer where the capital comes with few to no strings attached to it. So we in our family think about, what are the opportunities that we take that should bear a return for us? What are those other opportunities we take where we just got to give up capital, no strings attached, because it's the right and powerful thing to do to get something activated. And then on the just and sustainable economy side, like, we've just got a lot of work to do to bring a lot of things into alignment at a time when there's a lot of ecological catastrophe around us. And I say ecological, borrowing that from my wife, because it's not just the environmental and the physical place consequence of what's happening. The ecological part of this is about how all of this stuff is related, and how humans oftentimes are at the heart of these relationships where, one, the money being the tool is manipulating us. We aren't manipulating the tool very well, and we aren't using the tool in ways that are very purposeful and that create the world that we think should be able to sustain us all, and not have the kinds of disparities and not perpetuate the kinds of disparities that I think we experience in part because of the way we approach capital.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So with that being said, ecological, relationship, intersectionality, I want to start with Joyce really quickly. What are the non-monetary investments that you do on an everyday basis, year in, year out, that you can speak to? And I'd like to ask the whole panel this as well.
I would say mobilization of resources. And what I mean by that is I try to every day come across, think of something that someone else may be able to use just from having conversations. So I invest I think I invest my time in obviously things that are important to me, but things that will make, I mean, it's going to sound cliche, but the world a better place. You know, I mean, I'm a serial volunteer for that reason. It's like I like giving my time in the community to things that matter, because it matters to me that the community stays there and continues to look like us, and that's falling farther and farther apart. So anything I can do to constantly be present is what I'm going to do. So, and I think resources. People are always looking for resources of all different types, and I like to collect those resources and be able to, you know, hand them off to people who I know are going to go and do great things with them. So investing my time in volunteering and doing things like with Ujima. I mean, I do everything I can in Ujima so that I can be part of that. You know, I say this is what we did to make it better for all of us. It's not just some of us. So I like it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate you, because
I appreciate you.
and I'd like to shift over to Mr. Gatskin. Same question, but I also want to lift and highlight the fact that you are an investor in the Ujima Fund. So you do optimize both pockets, so left and right. So just want to be clear, so the audience knows. But the same question goes for you. What are some non-monetary investments that you make?
Non-monetary investments. So I would say teaching. I used to. So teaching would be one. And I used to teach a class for over 25 years called Christianity and the Problem of Racism. And I think that was a much needed class in the world. I've been a missionary. So I've done missionary work with people like Mother Teresa. I've been all over Africa and Western Europe. And I think that the work that I do on my day job is my investment, because I probably have not. I always tease the dean that I'm bringing down the class average from Sloan. I'm not really the president of any giant company or anything like that, which is what you'd expect from a Sloan graduate. The other day, I was able to make a phone call and raise a couple $1 million. And I thought to myself, how can I do this for myself? Like, you know, this is great and all, but you know, I could use some of that. So that's not probably in terms of the kind of stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis, trying to help the community. I do a lot of political advocacy, you know, and again, across a number of things, because I understand the importance. When I used to work at the Minority Business Development Center at the Department of Commerce, you would see all the kinds of things that we're talking about: challenges with access to capital, challenges for getting access to markets. And then you would see that we were never making any progress. The city of Boston or the state is, you know, doing such a poor job in terms of procurement from other investors. And again, it seemed as though almost every avenue was blocked. The one thing I would say, things like with things like the Big Dig and the Third Harbor Tunnel. And I remember, watching that project go from a few $1 billion to $20 billion. And I said, if we had actually got our 10% set aside, there should be all kinds of minority millionaires in Boston just from the construction on the tunnel. And I said, here you had Bechtel, Parkins, Brinkerhoff, and I said, one of the largest companies in the world, projects over budget by billions of dollars, not on time, kills people, poor quality work, and yet you still have to have people talk about they don't know if they want to hire a black business because they're not sure about the quality of the work.
Right.
So just things like that. And probably the latest thing that I've tried to focus on was how to increase the number of Black founders of technology companies. It just seems to me ironic that here we are in the Howard of tech world competing with Silicon Valley, and we have only a handful of people who are Black who have actually founded a tech company in this area. And that you can find more tech founders in places like Miami and Atlanta and New York than you can right here in the Silicon Valley of the East. So that's probably like one of my focus areas right now.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same for both Rahn and Mr. Jeffries, with a tad bit of nuance, with just the fact that just would love for you both to kind of elevate the fact that everyday people are making these investments all the time. And just making sure that people understand that, like, you can do this as well too. So although we're talking about broader investment and the need for these things in the different ways you can, there are folks that are doing this every single day. So just want to just put that nuance there, and just hoping that you both can reaffirm that. And so let me hop over to Mr. Dorsey, and for those who are working with us, Ujima background, feel free to let me know where we are on time as well too. Mr. Dorsey.
Sure. When I think about non-monetary investments, Boston's a pretty small place, and I've, had the great fortune to live at the intersections of a number of relationships, but it still strikes me that the degrees of separation, particularly for folks of color in the city, are too great. So I try to make my network available, and I try to make my network show up for people. And so, I'm going to be gracious about, making the call and not overextending folks that I know. But at the same time, there's no reason for folks not to be connected, in a city that is both this small and this wealthy, and wealthy by a number of measures as well. And in some ways, it's the height of exclusion and injustice to me when I talk to people who are like, not only do I not know how to get in the door, I don't know where the door is. Like that feels criminal to me. So I want my network to be available for folks to do the things that they already know they need to do for themselves, and that they probably know how to do better than the rest of us. So yeah, there it is.
Thank you. Yeah, that door one, that's a big one. Mr. Jeffries.
You know what? I'm gonna piggyback what Ron said. And I think Ron and I are in a lot of groups together, and I think we're in a lot of groups together because I think one of the ways that we've been investing both together and separately is our social capital, and that is an important piece of investment, and worth its weight in gold. And so I think that's been an important part to me coming up in the city, and having the fortune to be mentored by folks like Robert Lewis Jr., like Hubie Jones, who've extended their social capital to me, and which in turn allowed me to learn from them and learn from others and be exposed to other folks. And so I think that's been an important lesson for me. And I think having a community that also understands that our philanthropy is our time, talent, and treasure, and at any given moment deploying whichever we have available to support each other.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for participating in this particular way. I feel like there's so many different areas that we could go, because I feel like we could do this all night. Or at least I can. I don't know about y'all, but at least I can. So thank you again for your participation. Thank you for showing up in the different ways that you do show up each and every single day. And I'm going to hand it over to Sheena and carry on. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all for that. That was amazing. I learned a lot. I already text Imari about how can I get in on everything that you're doing. But I think that was a really important, particularly for us to see folks that look like ourselves who are investing. And what I really appreciated about it in particular, you make it sound very doable. You know, being able to hear kind of how you got into it. And I think sometimes things like that can seem like something really scary and major. And hearing the steps that you took was very inspiring for me, and I'm sure for others who are listening. And so now we are going to bring on our special guest, who's going to be joining Nia for conversation. I mentioned earlier Nwamaka, who's the CEO of Katali Foundation and Managing Director of the Restorative Economies Fund. She leads the foundation's day-to-day operations while holding the community-centered strategy and vision for the fund. And she has an extensive background, community organizing, electoral campaigns, policy advocacy around racial, social, and environmental justice issues. Is deeply committed to supporting projects that build resilient, healthy, and self-determined communities that are rooted in shared prosperity, which is what we're talking about tonight. So welcome, Nwamaka, to the conversation, Black on Black Investing, and I'll hand it over to Nia.
Thank you very much, Sheena. And thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Rahn. Thank you, Imari. Thank you, Joyce. That was fantastic. And just really appreciate it. As Sheena said, not only sharing, I think, the accessibility of investing, but also really thinking about all of the different types of investments that we can make in ourselves and our community. So also really just making sure we understand it doesn't have to be relegated to just money or high wealth activity. So this was a fantastic panel, or I should say roundtable. So thank you very much. So happy to have Nwamaka Agbo here. It's great to see you, Nwamaka. Thank you so much for joining us. We've sent out the bio, so I don't think we need to kind of do that. What we want to do is actually start off with something that we've borrowed from Sheena, or I should say it should be attributed to Sheena, to the Collier connection. And what we want to do is just start off with, what is your B-side? And B-side, just for those who are watching, the way Sheena kind of explains it is, you know, back in the day when you bought music, you actually bought it in physical material form. So if it was a cassette, there was side A, there was side B. If it was a CD, side A, side B type deal. And so then the B side were kind of not the automatic or not the obvious hits. And so they would be kind of like the recordings that were made. And so it would go on the B side, and they actually turn out to be gems. And so the Collier Connection opens up a lot of their gatherings with that question. And this seems appropriate. We're at Mass Black Expo. We are, in community with Black people in Boston, in and around Boston. So we're also just thinking of ways just to get to know each other more intimately, kind of beyond the usual networking-based transactional interactions we have with each other. So first question for you, Nwamaka, is what's your B-side?
I love this question, Nia. And I've had, funny story about me early in my 20s, many years ago. I had a DJ moment, I had my Technique 1200s. I still have them. They're in the living room. And my dream was to always be able to spin a sweet mix of Afrobeat, disco, and funk. Like, that just feels like such a great party. But yeah, I think that's what I'd offer my B-sides. I think what else I would say, there's B-sides pre-pandemic, B-side post-pandemic. I would say in my post-pandemic self right now, I am really learning to re-love my home and discover my home, and being able to have taken I've recently planted like 5 fruit trees. And so I'm just really excited about watching the seasons come from one to another and being able to really enjoy what it means, how to celebrate this opportunity to really be home, be in my community, be with my partner. I used to spend a lot of time on the road. This is around this time of year when I would make my last trip to Boston, because once the snow comes, I'm out. I won't see you guys until the spring. But yeah, trying to kind of reclaim making community, making home in a time when physically traveling isn't possible. Yeah, I think that's what I had offered my B-sides, and yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Amaka. And then just here, the audience can't see this, but just kind of in our internal chat here, it just blew up at Amaka's B-side. We're going to continue on with just a little bit more biography and personal history, because I think this next question definitely seems appropriate for this moment. And what I mean by that is Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives, pandemic, different and multiple movements moving and interacting. And from my observation, people, trying to figure out where they fit in during this time, what their role is, what they want their action to be, what the correct course of action to be. And so, as I said, we've shared your bio, I'm sorry, not the bio. We shared the Medium piece that you wrote recently, introducing the Katali Foundation, and you actually start off that piece saying you talk about your history as a community organizer, and then your transition into the world of philanthropy, and now as a CEO of Katali. And so just by way of bio, a little more personal history, I'm wondering if you can just kind of talk about your journey as a community organizer, your transition to the world of philanthropy, your transition to being a CEO of Katali, and really just, I think what's important for me, at least with this question, is your decision-making around those roles. How you decided to fulfill those roles at the time in your life that you did, and what was behind those decisions.
And yeah, I would respond to this by saying I wish I could say that I intentionally landed where I'm at, but I think a lot of my professional and personal experiences have led to an uncovering based on like just a set of questions that I've been in search of. For me, one of the grounding quotes that has been really leading me this year is a quote by Nicole Hanna, who did the 1619 Project. And in one of her podcasts, she opens up by talking about how Black people have been the great perfecters of democracy. And one of the reasons that really resonates with me is because for so much of my kind of professional, quote unquote, professional organizing career has been in search of how do we actually identify the pathways, the avenues for Black people to be able to exercise self-determination. And so I lift that up to share the 2008 Great Recession was an eye-opening moment for me. I was in my late 20s when the recession happened, and I was working at an amazing organization, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. I still have a very close relationship with that organization, and I was in a leadership position. And it was a moment in which we, as the organization, were really trying to figure out how to address a lot of the budget falls, quite frankly, that were happening because foundations were shifting their strategy. They weren't getting as much into their endowments because the 2008 economic recession ended up having a delayed impact in 2012. And for me at the time, I remember we had these weekly meetings, and we were all looking to our director of finance and operations to really tell us what was happening. And it was really evident that, as somebody who's committed to policy work, I've done direct organizing, done electoral organizing, I actually didn't understand the income and the expenses and how that was shaping our organization, what made it possible for us to kind of be paid organizers, people who were committed to social movement, social work. And so I decided to go back to school. I decided to go back to school to really study nonprofit financial management. I started to really study the emerging impact investing field at that time and trying to understand these ways in which people were trying to engage in finance and use capital to create a social return. And, we can spend some time, I think it's like a sidebar chat over some bourbon to really unpack all that's happened in the impact investing field. But all that to say, what I recognized as I was kind of learning about how people were structuring deals and deciding whether to make debt or equity investments is that my experiences in doing policy had been one in which, I organized people, I turned people out to give public comment. But what always ended up happening is after we had negotiated the amendment, we would find that it was lobbyists or backroom deals that actually ended up shaping the policy that we thought we as people were shaping. And so the ways that money ends up influencing our political process and undermining democracy, right? And so for me, I was like, oh, I need to understand this money game. I really need to figure out what's at play there, and understanding the racial wealth gap and understanding the ways that Black people and communities of color have been systemically oppressed, extracted from, and exploited. I was like, well, what are the ways for us to actually generate capital in a way that it's not necessarily, that's not advancing capitalism, right? But it's actually advancing our shared prosperity. And so spent some time within other organizations like eco districts, learning about urban planning and how community development is also shaped by private interests outside developers, and how do we actually look at what community development can start to look like. I ended up creating a framework called restorative economics, one designed to really invite us to sit with the hurt and harm of how Black people have been impacted by our economic systems as a way of advancing wealth for private, wealthy male wealth holders, and then figure out, well, how do we actually reinvest resources in a way that helps us to build shared prosperity? And the truth of the matter is, I see capital as a tool. I think capitalism is a system, and our ability to disaggregate the two and understand that we have the ability to use capital as something that is regenerative, that helps to heal, that helps to support communities in thriving, as opposed to the system of capitalism that's designed to extract and maximize profit at the expense of human life. And so can spend some time unpacking restorative economics as it makes sense. But for me, my decisions around like how I've gone from organizing to doing policy work to working on electoral campaigns to now even sitting to being the CEO of Katali has been one trying to answer questions and trying to gain more intentional information so that I can then have a more fully formed picture around how to support people of color, Indigenous communities, and Black communities in particular, and being able to have access to the resources that we need to actually create an economy rooted in liberation, equity, and freedom.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nwamaka. And you started to go into the next question, and I'm glad to hear, because I had been telling people, I think she coined restorative economics. I hope I'm not lying. I'll find out on Friday. And glad to hear that is actually accurate. So yeah, I think this is perfect. So I'm going to just ask you to continue. And if you could tell us more about the restorative economics framework, and if you can also, and you've done this a little bit already, but maybe even tell us a little bit more about how restorative economics is different from how most of us might understand economics, or what we kind of might assume that we know about economics in the way that it should go and it should be and it should work.
Mm-hmm. Great. So one of the things I'll offer is that I think restorative economics, and I should say the framework itself, is something that I created. I have Googled restorative economics, and there were some guys who were using similar language, but the framework is distinct. And so people that want to use the framework, yes, that's me. But all that to say, when I started to really study what was happening in the 2008 recession, that was the same time organizations like the New Economy Coalition were also kind of going through their work. That was also around the same time, groups like Movement Generation really helped to popularize the just transition framework. So restorative economics, I would say, it sits in complement to New Economy, solidarity economy, just transition work. for me, I felt it was really important to bring a very explicit race analysis, because what I was observing at the time is that even people that were interested in kind of new economy frameworks, they were still replicating a lot of the racist and sexist tendencies of past social movements, right? So a lot of the things that we have been working to undo were showing up in this economic sphere because we hadn't actually grounded ourselves in understanding how racism in particular interacts with capitalism. And those two play off of each other to, unfortunately, perpetually harm Black communities. And so how I think of restorative economics is different than how people would study economics in general. The story that I've shared, and not to bore you with it, Nia, is that when I went back to graduate school to do my master's, and I opened my economics textbook, the opening paragraph framed the study of economics as those who get to decide who eats potatoes and who eats caviar, who drives a Corvette and who takes the public bus. And so that was a way of indoctrinating us into the worldview for the rest of the text that we would be studying throughout that semester. And so for me, it's like, oh, that's how you're deciding to see the world, right? I actually want to see a world where it's not about some people having caviar and some people having potatoes, but a conversation on how do we ensure that people have access to safe, equitable, healthy food, right? How do we ensure that people have access to reliable public transportation? And so for me, restorative economics requires us to first recognize that the ways that we have structured the distribution of resources, both financial and non-financial, across urban, rural, and suburban communities has been designed in a way to ensure that some benefit at the expense of others. And that in order for us to actually get towards a place of repair, we need to be able to confront the harm that has happened, how it happened, as a way of ensuring that we're not replicating and repeating it going forward. And so the ability to actually be intentional about reinvesting resources into those Black, Indigenous, and communities of color in a way that heals the harm, that shifts the way that we typically extract value out of those communities, and instead leave more value in the community so that they can continue to regenerate under their terms, is the work that I seek to do. And so there's a number of principles. I'll try not to bore you too much with the details, but what it boils down to is that with my work, I really focus in on supporting community-owned and community-governed projects. And these projects are not just about more people owning more things together, which I think is a great goal, but really understanding that there's a political strategy in that, there's a cultural strategy in that. And so how do we actually leverage our assets, our economic assets, to advance the political and cultural power of our communities as well? And one of the reasons I think it's important to support people in owning more things together and going through shared ownership and shared governance is that that's where it allows us to actually care about the economic well-being of our neighbor and really understanding what collective determination and collective liberation looks like. And the shared governance piece requires us to be the ones that are able to and willing to make the decisions for how resources are shared and distributed across our communities, right? I think one of the things that I've observed in my work, our field, is that while we're clear we don't want the white ruling class to make decisions on our behalf, that then means that we need to be able to make decisions on our behalf. And some of those decisions about how we distribute resources are not easy, right? But it's through being in community and sharing in the decision making and sharing in the outcomes of those decisions that we kind of develop our muscle to govern. And so Michelle Mascarenhas-Swan from Movement Generation often talks about, if we're not prepared to govern, we're not prepared to win, right? And so we actually need to be ready, willing, and able to step up into those leadership positions when we win. And so that is what our work is kind of preparing us for. And within all of that, we seek to support, the restorative economics framework includes the supporting of projects, once again, that are rooted in a right relationship with local social movements, that are looking at a governance structure that allows us to center the needs of the most impacted communities. So how do we think about centering the needs of houseless individuals, of undocumented individuals, of those that stand to be impacted by whatever businesses we have in place? And then also, once again, the opportunity to really reckon with the history of how we got here and therefore do things differently. So that's kind of a quick overview of the framework. I would say, I think I will out myself and say, one of the things is like, I am not an entrepreneur. I've never described myself as an entrepreneur. I guess I have a consulting practice, or I did. But for me, the ability to invite people to think about moving away from just this model of like the sole charismatic entrepreneur to actually understanding what does it mean to be in relationship with our community? What does it mean to share power, decision making, and outcomes with the workers, invite workers into understanding all that we're navigating as an institution. And so I'm really interested in models where collective ownership is part of what we're experimenting with as well. I think I hit all your questions, so let me stop and see.
You did, Amaka. And actually, I'm trying to figure out if I want to ask you an extra question, but I'll hold it for a little later. So excellent, thank you. And you've talked about the principles already. We're now going to switch to your new role at Katali. You've talked about your journey through various roles, functions in various worlds, thinking about various things, all connected by questions, which I really appreciate. And I think just what I want to highlight for our audience here, and you talk about this in the medium piece as well. What I really appreciate about your journey being guided by questions is it also making it okay for the rest of us to have those questions as well. So just really just want to highlight that. I think that's really important. One of the things you talk about in the medium piece is the difference between one way or the way and multiple paths. And I think we'll get to that later. But just really just kind of want to uplift for people, just kind of really embracing that, because I think that that's something else that we were kind of indoctrinated with, this notion of kind of like a singular way to do thing or one path, and detours are a problem. So just really appreciate that, just holding questions. So let's talk about Katali. So you are the CEO of Katali. I think there are a couple of parts to this question. It feels appropriate to maybe talk about the origin of Katali. It is a different kind of foundation. So maybe kind of talking about the origin and if it feels appropriate. Again, what ways it might be different from how we traditionally understand philanthropy. And actually, this is actually connected to the second part of the conversation, which is, and what are the practices and the shifts that you're implementing at Katali?
Great questions. Yeah, I'll start off by saying the Katali Foundation is new, like Nia shared. I was already working closely with a set of individuals, the donors of our foundation. They had invited me to bring the restorative economics framework to create what's called an integrated capital fund. A similar concept as the Ujima Fund, in that being able to move both grant and investment, non-extractive investments to enterprises and community-owned projects as needed. And so we were already in a conversation around how to actually apply the framework to structure a fund. What had happened was the size of the fund that we were talking about grew because these donors received an unexpected amount of returns from an investment that had been made at the end by their family at the end of 2018. And so the size of what we were talking about grew. And what ended up happening from there is that I continued to work with them to kind of create the restorative, what we call now the Restorative Economies Fund, which is designed as a $300 million integrated capital fund with the Katali Foundation. And over working the course of the next year and more and working with them, they then invited me to help lead the foundation. So as we think about Katali, I would say that this is a foundation that was created by a set of family members who are very committed to redistributing and liberating their wealth, land, and power. And so they have spent time doing a lot of individual work as people who have come into inherited wealth to actually understand what does it look like to actually share this with the communities that they are a part of, that they want to support? What does it look like to actually acknowledge some of that harm that we talk about in the restorative economics framework? And what does it look like to support those communities in making the decisions on how these resources should be governed and redistributed? And so, in addition to the time when I was working on building the Restorative Economies Fund, there were two other vehicles as well that the family was engaged in, and those were focused or designed as grant-making entities. And so we have our Mindfulness and Healing Justice program area, which is a grant-making body designed to really support people of color in having access to the contemplative practices, and also figuring out how do we engage in a conversation around healing that is both about the individual, but it's also about the collective and also about community. And that's where the healing justice part of their program comes in. And for us, our work has also looked at how do we integrate healing justice as a part of the governance structures that we look at as well with our restorative economics projects. And then we also have our environmental justice resource collaborative. That project was designed as what's called a participatory grant-making entity. And so essentially 9 women of color environmental justice leaders from across the country were brought in to set the grant-making strategy and make the decisions for how to use those grants. And that's a $50 million participatory grant-making vehicle. And then we have the Restorative Economies Fund. So what kind of emerged was less about the donors setting out and saying, this is our money, this is the foundation we're going to create. They were already in relationship with social movements, with individuals, had made a commitment to move these resources. And then over the course of being in proximity to one another as consultants, we then decided and agreed that we wanted to come together under the banner of Katali Foundation. And so that's kind of how I came into my leadership role with the foundation, and have the pleasure of continuing to serve as the managing director of the Restorative Economies Fund, but then also being able to support our 2 other program teams as well. I think one of the things that makes us different, since you guys have read some of you may have read the Medium blog post, is we are a spend out foundation. And so what that means for us is that typically most foundations are designed to exist in perpetuity. Essentially, they have a set of investments that are made up of their corpus, and there's a mandate or a policy within the foundation in which the size of the corpus has to stay at a certain amount. And this is what then allows them to generate returns, both a mix that the foundation will keep, but then what also goes into their 5% grant making. What we're looking to do is set a rough timeline of 10 to 15 years. We're still working through the projections of what the horizon of our work will look like, but actually look to spend out our capital over the $450 million over the next 10 to 15 years in service of the Restorative Economies Fund, the Environmental Justice Resource Collaborative, and the Mindfulness Healing Justice Program area. And so for us, this is an opportunity to really model what it looks like to redistribute and liberate wealth, understanding that the projects that we seek to support are projects that we do see as financially sustainable, projects that we see as critical to their local economy and ecosystems, and that rather than us generating the returns back into our foundation for our own ongoing wealth accumulation of the institution, to really support that those returns are reinvested in the community and allowed to continue to generate local economies. And so this is where the experimentation piece that you talked about comes into play. We have the Restorative Economies Fund. We're moving financial and non-financial resources across the capital spectrum. That's one experiment. We have our Environmental Justice Resource Collaborative, that's a participatory grant-making body. That's another experiment around decision-making power. And then we have our Mindfulness and Healing Justice program area as well, understanding what does it look like to actually build awareness of the internal and external healing modalities for people of color. And so these are the various experiments that we're running. And I would even say that within the Restorative Economies Fund, we're clear that while we're a big fan of Boston Ujima, we think Boston Ujima is distinct, unique, and special as it should be, which is different than the Runway Project, right? Which is different than Seed Commons and Cooperation Richmond. So how do we actually move our resources in a way that it sprinkles enough seeds across the country and at some point maybe even around the world to help germinate enough things for local communities that have their very own specific social, economic, political context to grow and germinate? One thing I forgot to add, within the Restorative Economies Fund, there's 3 or 4 types of projects that we seek to support. We seek to support community-governed loan funds, so like Ujima, where we see communities coming together to create decolonized financial infrastructure where they get to make the direct decisions around how to invest those resources in their local economy. We also support equitable economic development projects. So we think that there is a place for market rate development when it is being held as a community institution serving multiple organizations. And distinct from that, we also think it's important to support land and housing stabilization initiatives that take land and housing out of the speculative market. So looking at supporting cooperative real estate initiatives, community land trust initiatives, and then also infrastructure projects, the things that support a connectivity of people in a particular place. So microgrid energy systems, internet infrastructure systems, and so much more. And that throughout all of that is the need to support the capacity building work that allows these different projects and enterprises to grow and thrive in their community. So projects like organizations like the Center for Economic Democracy, Sustainable Economies Law Center, and others are providing a level of support, technical assistance, or values-aligned technical assistance that makes it possible for these initiatives to then grow and thrive. And so those are some of the ways that we are looking at doing things differently with the Katali Foundation. I think really quickly, sorry I'm talking so much, but did want to hit on one of the other ways, in addition to being a spend-out foundation, that we're looking to experiment in supporting communities, is that when we see organizations like Movement for Black Lives make a call for generational funding, we think it's important to show up and rise to that call. And so not only showing up to provide rapid response funding, but making the multi-year general operations support grants that we know are critical to building strong foundations and strong communities, so that an organization isn't having to fundraise from year to year, but they can actually take a long-term look at and plan for what we want to do over 5 years, and what does that therefore mean for our local communities. We also think it's important to be very explicit about helping communities think through, what does it look like to build community wealth? How are we actually supporting those projects that are connected to social movements that are building and contesting for political power, and helping to kind of, perfect democracy, as I shared earlier, in our local communities, and recognizing that we need to be flexible and nimble as a foundation. And so rather than requiring organizations to make long, lengthy proposals and reports, being in relationship with them, being in conversation, building trust, so that, and that's what allows us to then move the resources. So rather than having organizations send a proposal, we'll just ask them, do you have a recent proposal that you've written for another institution that captures your work that we can look at, right? I can actually just call me up, text me, and be like, how are you doing? How are your businesses doing with during COVID? How can we support? Do we need to look at restructuring and investments that we may have made to make it possible to support enterprises throughout this pandemic? And so those are some of the things that we are experimenting with. And once again, because we are not required, because our financial returns are not a benchmark to determine our success, it provides us the flexibility to actually explore what is possible when we resource projects at their highest point of need, and really show up to be, to share in the risk, to share in the labor, and to really support them as best we can. So that's what we're learning with Katali. I just stepped into my position August 1st. So yeah, we've started grant making at the end of 2019. We are moving through a $10 million pilot for our investment side, our non-extractive debt investments that we're looking to make in forms of patient capital to support a whole host of projects. And so we are excited to share what we learn as we run these experiments, and hopefully continue to iterate in deep relationship with projects like Boston Ujima to learn and do better.
Thank you so much, Nwamaka. That was wonderful, and you were definitely not talking too much. This is excellent. It's so excellent. If I have permission, I do have one more question for you. But if I have permission, there is an audience question that came through, which is, can you share a couple of specific key milestones this past year? You might already talked about that, but
Yeah, I think a couple of key milestones this year. we moved $3 million in rapid response funding to support Black-led organizations across the country as a way of supporting them in the uprising. And we really try to be intentional about not only hitting organizations that were doing door-to-door organizing, but also organizations doing the healing justice, also organizations that needed grants to support their businesses. I think the other piece that I lift up is being able to focus in on the geographical importance of how we distributed those resources. So the South is where the majority of Black Americans live. And so making sure that we're also resourcing those communities that are in the closest proximity to white supremacy, at least in terms of physically. And so I think that's just an important thing for us to lift up. In addition to that, we also joined the Democracy Frontlines Fund, an initiative pulled together by Crystal Healing of the Libra Foundation, designed to really support, once again, Black-led organizing at the forefront of really helping to perfect our democracy. And we see that, when we look at the numbers from the elections, we really understand why it's critical to support those organizations like Black Voters Matter and Pro Georgia, because these are the organizations that make it possible for us to make sure that we're pushing back against supremacy. Some other milestones, we have continued to do grant making. So we're in year 2 of grant making for both of our 3 program areas. We are excited to have launched our investment fund earlier this year with the Restorative Economies Fund. And all in all, I would say that it just, we're excited to be able to be in deep partnership with our donors as people who also want to be public about the decision that they've made, and also working and supporting other wealthy wealth holders to think about how can we show up to really liberate our resources, understanding how our fates are intertwined. And so those are some peak milestones. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Cool. Thank you, Nwamaka. Thank you so much. And then this will be the last question, and it's a 2-part question. And so this is so one part of this is going back to personal for you, and then the other is a bit more advisory maybe for the rest of us. So what, if any, individual shifts did you have to make, particularly as a Black woman? And then I would just say any other, identities you would think would be important in your personal journey. Were there any individual shifts you had to make in kind of your journey and being and learning about impact investing and philanthropy and where you are now at Katali? It's the first part. And then the second part is we're at the Mass Black Expo. We can't see the audience. I think there are between 300 and 400 people here. I'm going to say most of them are Black. Varying backgrounds, different professions, different perspectives. What lessons do you think we can glean as individuals? And before you came, we did a roundtable with some local Black investors, and we talked about the different types of both monetary and non-monetary that they're making, what their investment philosophy is, how they learned about investment, narratives that they had about investment growing up, just to kind of give you some broader context in the conversation we're all participating in. What are some lessons you think we can glean from the restorative economics framework, from Katali, and what shifts might, understanding we're all different, but what shifts might we make in our lives as Black individuals and communities, and as we think about how we invest in and connect to and support ourselves and our communities?
Thanks, Mia. I'll start with the first part of the question. I think the shifts that I've had to make is, I've been consulting the past few years. And so operating as an independent consultant means that I have had the pleasure of being really intentional about who I get to work with and how I work with them. And so moving into this role now with Katali requires me to be open and engaging with a whole bunch of different needs and perspectives and individuals. And so really learning what leadership looks like, learning what servant leadership looks like and how to experiment with that. And I think for me, one of the things that I continue to navigate is I'm a Black woman, and because of the good melanin, I look younger than I am. So oftentimes I get underestimated, and because I'm short, Nia knows I'm short. I get overlooked, and the ability to believe in myself enough to speak up and insist on being heard, and to do it in a way because I have a mandate to support the communities that I come from, the communities that look like me. And so this is not a moment for any of us to play small. This is a moment for us to lead purposeful lives and lead us integrity, and to recognize that it's actually our community, those folks that hold us accountable, right? And so one of the reasons I love the film Ujima and Center for Economic Democracy, I know these are the folks that are going to call me in when they see me moving out of line. And that is the thing that helps me stay true to my mandate, my spirit, my own integrity. So really learning to humble myself and lean into that has been a growing point. Because once again, as a consultant, you kind of get to hang in the background, you get to, and this is just different, a different form of leadership and creating leaderful spaces where my team also feels supported in their leadership, and understanding that I want them to lead purposeful lives, and I want them to be out in community and sharing our work. And so I'm learning all of those pieces, and it's interesting learning it in a virtual space. Typically we go to conferences, we'll be at the bar, after hours, and this is just a little bit different. And so it also requires me to be really intentional about connecting with people on a regular basis. I think, to the second part of the question on like what I would offer to folks, I think once again, I would start with where I just ended, is the connection is really important. And continuing to have spaces like this where people are able to come share, where we don't actually have to feel like our challenges are ours to bear alone, but we actually get to bring what we're learning, what we're adjusting to our community to help us problem solve and, kind of share in that together. I think the other thing that I would add is, and some may disagree, but my own political ideology is that we don't have the privilege of being politically neutral in the work that we do, even as entrepreneurs. And so how do we actually understand that every act that we take as Black people is a political statement? And therefore, how do we ensure that not only our personal, but our professional and entrepreneurial work is really connected and rooted in social movements, where we're really thinking through, if I'm a bakery and I have leftover baked goods at the end of the day, how am I actually taking those goods and supporting Black organizers or supporting houseless individuals? How am I ensuring that I am supporting our workers and being civically engaged and giving them time off not to vote, but maybe even time off to go engage in get out the vote activities and be a part of the political process? How am I leveraging my voice as a landlord, as a business owner, to be a part of the Chamber of Commerce, to actually show up and shift policies locally? And so I personally think that we have a responsibility as Black people to be politically engaged in our local, statewide, and federal work. And so always being able to wrestle with how is our work as an entrepreneur a political act in service of our collective liberation. I think the other thing that I'll sit with for those of us that run businesses where we actually have physical spaces, to be able to think about how those spaces actually can be engaged for being a sanctuary to those that need it most. So Restore Oakland, a project out in Deep East Oakland, is a project that I've had the pleasure of working on. And we have, in addition to a number of other spaces, the restaurant space was designed to be a sanctuary restaurant based off of the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United model. And the sanctuary restaurant to support undocumented workers, right? To ensure that formerly returning citizens, formerly incarcerated individuals had a place where they could come work and be respected. And so also thinking about accessing our spaces, accessing the jobs that we hire, and being really intentional about who we bring into that space and how we ensure that that space creates a feeling of safety and belonging for our communities. I think the other piece that I would name here is also the importance of meeting spaces. The ability to, when our business may not be operating, how are we inviting those businesses to be an opportunity for people to come and gather and organize, right? Like people that may have wanted to do get out the vote activity, but needed a phone, needed good cell service, come park up, let's actually host a phone banking. And then lastly, I would say the opportunity to always think about this piece of shared prosperity. And I joined just as you were kind of closing the last session, Nia, but shared prosperity is not just about the financial resources, right? It's also about the non-financial resources. How are we also sharing our knowledge, our expertise, our networks, our relationships with others in our community so that they're also able to kind of tap into what it takes to actually build a business from the ground up, because this is hard. And given all the statistics that we know about the racial wealth divide and why we don't have friends and family capital and why it's so hard to get off the ground, what we can start to share is our relationships and our networks and our expertise with one another. And so those are some of the things that I would look to leave us all with. I think being really intentional about, I forget which rapper says it, one of them says it, but if I'm doing well and everybody else around me is struggling, that's not doing well. And so they didn't say it like that. They like rapped it to a cool beat. I can't rap. I won't try to do that. But I think that ethos though is important for us to hold as a black people, particularly as Black women. The last piece I'll say about Black women is an amazing individual, Aisha Ndoro, out of Jackson, has been working on a project called Magnolia Mothers Trust, where she has been experimenting with universal basic income to support Black mothers and ensuring that they have flexible capital once a month. And the reason I mention Black women is because we're always trying to make sure everybody else around us eats. We're always giving what we have out of our pocketbook. We're always kind of taking people in. And so also the ability to think about how we kind of take that Sankofa that we brought with us to inform how we learn from what we know to be indigenous to the ways of who we are as Black people, to then inform how we may want to transform our economy going forward. And so now I'm done, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nwamaka. Beautiful, wonderful. So here, snaps. I don't know if you could see Nwamaka just in terms of what's happening here internally. Snaps, and then I'll also just say the ED of BECMA, Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Shagun Idowu, texted me to let me know there are actually 592 people here. So I'm sure they have all appreciated your story. And your expertise and your wisdom. Thank you so very much. I'm also just going to prep you now. There may be a Black Trust Ask coming in the future. But thank you so much, Nwamaka. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. So great to see you all.
Thank you.
And now we prepare to close. So first I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us. That's Miss Joyce Clark, Nwamaka Agbo, that is Jenny Jaffard, that is Sheena Collier, that is Imari Parrish Jeffries, Ed Gatskin, Tehran Dorsey. We just wanted to give y'all an opportunity to listen and learn a little bit more about our work as we turn to the future. We got to hear so much beautiful words. So thank you once more.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, super grateful. Thank you. Thank everyone. It's just been a really great conversation. And I really appreciate Nwamaka bringing up connectivity and our ability and our need to be in connection with each other. I think that sort of reflects a little bit of some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So my name is James. I'm the Chief of Staff of Community and Culture at the Boston Ujima Project. And as some of you guys may know, Ujima is Swahili for collective work and responsibility. And in line with our central value and our commitment to build this ecosystem with Black and Brown folks who offer their time, their talent, and their treasure, we're going to be collaborating with Union Capital Boston this holiday season to a joint email appeal, which will allow the general public to donate to both organizations together. Part of our new economy is challenging individualistic measures of success and actively investing in efforts for all of us to win. And so our theme in this appeal is people, power, and participation. And we're hoping to really elevate our people's power in knowing what they need and how when they participate, they can actualize the community that they need and want. And so hopefully you all can participate and join and support this effort. It'll be hitting your emails very soon. So send it to your mom, your friend, your homie. We love any and all support. So I'll pass it to Sierra.
Hi, everyone. You heard from me before, but my name is Sierra Peters. I am the Communications Director at the Boston Ujima Project. And as you learned from this workshop, the Boston Ujima Project's mission is to return wealth in all of its articulations back to communities of color. Ujima believes that the challenges of inequality and poverty that we face will need a creative, interlocking system to work against. This year, we've seen that collectivity is central to build and keep the infrastructure that we need, as James just mentioned. Our liberation is tied up in yours too. So this month, at our weekly meetings, we're focusing on creating space for fellowship and community. Our political and financial education workshops are every Wednesday from 6 to 7:15 p.m. And you can join to co-create with us during our member teams from 7:15 to 8:30. If you'd like to learn more and join us, you can go to bostonujima.com/join, and you can find other ways to participate. And I'll pass it to Johnny.
Hi, everyone. Johnny Charles, Managing Director of Ujima Fund. Just wanted to give an update on where the fund is at this point. And so in the conversation, in the spirit of participation, political power, community governance, and to the audience of 592 people listening, just want to make sure I got that right. The fund currently right now is at 3.1 million. And so to be exact, we're looking at 3.1, so 3,109,790, which is a pool that's been raised. And besides that, this year in particular, we have had the most investments to date, with raising more money than previously last year. So taking in 1.8 million versus 1.2 last year. And then, which is new for us, our first ever, is our inaugural investor report, which is to come out at the end of this year, which is really going to feature a little bit of what I just shared. So pretty much where the fund is, or fund update, our investments in particular, specifically, and then continuing to tell our story as we continue to do, which our story meaning yours and ours. And to be specific in terms of the 3.1 million that we're at, our specific goal in total is 5 million. And so we expect to reach that 5 million by the end of the year, at the end of 2021. And in terms of total investors, we're at 275 to date and growing. So thank you, and thank you all for coming. And I'm going to hand it off to Nia.
I think that's it. Thank you for joining us. Just once again, just want to welcome all of our guests, Rahn, Dorsey, Imari, Jeffries, Joyce, Clark, Ed, Gatskin, local Black investors. It was great to hear your personal journeys, your investment philosophies, what you're invested in, how you got started, and then Nwamaka Agbo, wonderful to hear about your personal journey as well, and the shift you're making in philanthropy. And as James said, we look forward to highlighting your participation over this past year and looking ahead together. And we also look forward to talking about where we have arrived so far with the fund, where we plan to go in the future. And I should say there's still an opportunity to invest if you are a local resident of Massachusetts. And so feel free to look us up online, ujimaboston.com, to find out more information about Boston Ujima Project and the Ujima Fund. We are so glad you joined us today. We hope that it was compelling. We hope it was engaging. We hope it was informative. We hope it was inspiring, and we hope it was uplifting. And we will see you hopefully on a Wednesday at one of our member team meetings or political and financial education workshops, or at one of our assemblies, or at a Black Trust, or at another Black on Black investing workshop. Wherever it is, we hope to see you again. Thank you.